I take it that the annex has been disclosed to defense counsel and accused. Is there a unanimous answer on the question whether we could proceed today or whether you need more time to prepare with the accused what plea to enter?
Your Honour, we can proceed. I think that's a unanimous position on the part of all the defence teams.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parr. Always take it if one of the councils speak on behalf of all of them, I expect a firm protest whenever you say something you would not agree with. Then we'll proceed. But not after having clarified the following issue also to the accused. Whenever I speak during this hearing about an incident or a crime or a victim, you should always understand that as the crime allegedly committed or the incident that allegedly took place or an alleged victim. Because at the very start of these proceedings, nothing has yet been established and you are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Although it is not very practical to add to every word I say alleged or allegedly, that would keep us for another hour in this courtroom. So therefore, but that's the way you should understand my words when I'm referring to crimes or victims or incidents or whatever. Then I'm supposed to read the indictment to you, since you all know now that the indictment contains 60 pages. I'd like to know whether you want me to read it in its entirety or whether I should give a summary. At the end of the summary, I'll read each of the counts to you, and if you'd like to enter a plea today, you can plead guilty or not guilty to that count. So there are two questions. First, whether the indictment should be read in its entirety, and the second question is whether the accused, and that could be different for any of them, want to enter a plea today. Could I hear, to start with one answer? Mr. Parr.
The position of our defence team is that there is no need to read the entire indictment. We would like to have the summary read as briefly as possible in order to expedite today's proceedings. And the other question was, I forget. Well, we are prepared to enter a plea today, Your Honour.
Thank you. I'll try to keep the summary then short, but you should also understand that this is not a kind of a private meeting between two parties and a judge, but this is a public hearing in which it should be clear not only for those participating in this hearing, but also for those attending this hearing what it is all about. The indictment brought against you consists of 7 parts. In the first part, the identity is of all of the accused is given, and it is described what positions you have held during the period of the indictment. In the second part of the indictment, a joint criminal enterprise is described, and the way in which you, the accused, allegedly took part in that joint criminal enterprise. In part 3 of the indictment, an overall view is taken on the general, political and military context in which the crimes were committed, and describes in broader terms how the joint criminal enterprise operated in it, and what kind of activity you have developed in this political and military context. Part 4 of the indictment describes in more detail what happened in more than 10 locations, such as municipalities or detention centers or military prisons, and mentions exactly what crimes specifically were committed in each of these locations. Then in Part 5, the indictment confronts you with the basis of your criminal responsibility in a variety of alternatives under Article 7.1 of the Statute of this Tribunal. And although participation in a joint criminal enterprise may be given much attention here, including for the possibility that you aided and abetted in the joint criminal enterprise, apart from having participated in it. This does not exclude, in the view of the Office of the Prosecution, your responsibility for planning, instigating, ordering, or committing, or aiding and abetting in the planning, preparation, or execution of these specific crimes. Each of you is therefore also charged as a co-perpetrator and or an indirect perpetrator of these crimes, apart from your responsibility as a participant in the joint criminal enterprise. Further, your responsibility is described in terms of your participation or involvement in a system of ill treatment. And reference in this respect is specifically made to a network of concentration camps and detention facilities, and the systematic deportation of Bosnian Muslims, and various forms of physical and sexual abuse which took place in that system. And in this respect, I'd like to ask a short question to you, Mr. Scott. Is this system of ill treatment a separate and additional form of responsibility under Article 7.1, or is it just an explanation of one of the other forms?
May it please the Court, the position of the Office of the Prosecutor, Your Honor, is that this might be what's sometimes called the second variation of joint criminal enterprise. There are sometimes, and I hate to use colloquialisms on this, but we sometimes talk in joint criminal enterprise 1, 2, and 3, and there's a second version involving systems of ill treatment, and the prosecution views this as a distinct, related but distinct theory of responsibility.
Yes, that's how I understood it, but I just wanted to be sure that this was a correct way of understanding the indictment. Finally, the indictment holds you responsible in your capacity as a superior or as a commander, exercising de jure or de facto and or de facto control as a superior official or an officer. This charge includes that you failed to do whatever you could have done to prevent the crimes to be committed by those under your supervision or under your command, and that you failed to punish, remove, or discipline those who committed those crimes. I now move to the sixth part of the indictment. In the sixth part of the indictment, 26 counts are listed, mentioning the crimes you are charged with. In this part of the indictment, reference is made to the applicable legal provisions and also to the paragraphs in the indictment where you find the facts underlying these description legal terms of the crimes. Then in the seventh part of the indictment you find additional allegations of the indictment, setting out some general elements relevant in relation to some or sometimes all of the crimes charged, such as the characteristics of the armed conflict or of the widespread and systematic attack in which the crimes allegedly were committed, special intent in respect of some crimes, or a description of the parties and individuals involved in view of their status under treaty law. I don't have to draw your attention again to the confidential, as it reads in my note, but not confidential, well, still confidential, but not under seal anymore, the annex to the indictment, in which details are given about the identity of persons killed, wounded, sexually abused in the various locations and under various circumstances, and about details about sniping incidents against civilians in Mostar. This is a general overview. I will summarize or quote some parts of the indictment which seem to be of even greater importance than others, and I'll do that in somewhat more detail. First of all, I'll give you the list of crimes in, as I said, Part 6 of the indictment, which clarifies what crimes you're charged with. That is, persecutions on political, racial and religious ground as a crime against humanity, murder as a crime against humanity, willful killing as a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions, rape as a crime against humanity, inhuman treatment through sexual assault, also a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions, deportation as a crime against humanity, unlawful deportation of a civilian as a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions, inhumane acts by forcible transfer, a crime against humanity, unlawful transfer of a civilian, a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions, imprisonment as a crime against humanity, unlawful confinement of a civilian as a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions, inhumane acts through the conditions of confinement, also a crime against humanity, inhuman treatment through the conditions of confinement as a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions, cruel treatment, also related to conditions of confinement as a violation of the laws and customs of war, inhumane acts as a crime against humanity, inhumane treatment as a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions, cruel treatment as a war crime, unlawful labor, a war crime, extensive destruction of property not justified by military necessity and carried out unlawfully and wantonly as a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions, wanton destruction of cities, towns or villages, or devastation not justified by military necessity as a war crime, destruction or willful damage done to institutions dedicated to religion or education as a war crime, appropriation of property not justified by military necessity and carried out unlawfully and wantonly as a grave breach of the Geneva Conventions, plunder of public or private property as a war crime, unlawful attack on civilians as a violation of the laws and customs of war, that is a war crime, unlawful infliction of terror on civilians, specifically related, as the previous count, to Mostar, and cruel treatment related to the Mostar siege as a war crime. I've got one question in this respect, Mr. Scott. When I read these crimes under count 25, reference is made to Article 3 under D of the Statute of the Tribunal. Could you explain what 3D means in terms of unlawful infliction of terror on civilians, because under 3D I read not. It says seizure of, destruction or willful damage done to institutions dedicated to religion, charity and education, the arts and sciences, historic monuments and works of art and science. Without further explanation, I have some difficulties in reconciling the unlawful infliction of terror on civilians with Article 3D.
I think, Your Honor, in looking at that, it might have been more accurate to simply refer to Article 3 for purposes of unlawful infliction of terror, because unlawful infliction of terror under the violations of the laws and customs of war, I think, encompasses, in fact, quite arguably, all subcategories A through E. That would be my initial answer, Your Honor, to that. I would have to probably, to give a full answer, to be completely transparent, Your Honor, I would need to consult probably and look at it closer and talk with my colleagues.
Yes. Well, perhaps you find an opportunity to do so. For the time being, if this would confuse you, I'd like to hear from you, but it might be that by mistake the prosecution included a letter D where it just wanted to refer to Article 3 of the statute, Article 3, which in general terms have been used in earlier indictments before this tribunal in relation to the unlawful infliction of terror on civilians. Having gone through the crimes for which you are held responsible, I would further give some details in respect of the joint criminal enterprise on which the indictment is focusing. It's not excluding other basis for your responsibility, but it's very much focusing on the joint criminal enterprise. I'd like to read to you what is the aim of this joint criminal enterprise as it is given in paragraph 15 of the indictment. It says that the aim was to politically and militarily subjugate, permanently remove, and ethnically cleanse Bosnian Muslims and other non-Croats who lived in areas on the territory of the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which were claimed to be part of the Croatian Community, and later Republic, of Herceg-Bosna, and to join these areas as part of a greater Croatia, whether in the short term or over time, and whether as part of the Republic of Croatia or in close association with it. By force, fear or threat of force, persecution, imprisonment and detention, forcible transfer and deportation, appropriation and destruction of property and other means which constituted or involved the commission of crimes which are punishable under Articles 2, 3 and 5 of the Tribunal Statute. The territorial ambition of the joint criminal enterprise was to establish a Croatian territory with the borders of the Croatian Banovina, a territorial entity that existed from 1939 to 1941. It was part of the joint criminal enterprise to engineer the political and ethnic map of these areas so that they would be Croat-dominated both politically and demographically. This is how the purpose and the aim of the joint criminal enterprise is described in the tribunal. It's also described that the joint criminal enterprise did exist of more persons than just you. Apart from you, the indictment mentions by name, apart from many others who are not mentioned by name, Franjo Tučman, Gojko Susak, Janko Bobetko, and Mate Boban as participants in this joint criminal enterprise. All of those persons mentioned by name have deceased. In paragraph 17 of the indictment, it is described by what means you allegedly participated as leaders in this joint criminal enterprise. Without reading it all, I'll give important parts to you. By establishing, organizing, directing, funding, facilitating, supporting, maintaining and or operating Herceg-Bosna HVO governmental and political structures and processes, or various elements thereof. By establishing, organizing, commanding, ordering, directing, funding, facilitating, participating in, supporting, maintaining and or operating the Herceg-Bosna HVO military, police, intelligence and other forces. By initiating, promoting, planning, preparing, participating in, supporting and or encouraging the development, formulation, dissemination and or implementation of Herceg-Bosna HVO political, governmental and or military policies, programs, plans, decrees, decisions, regulations, strategy or tactics which were used as basis or vehicles for various actions against or to the disadvantage of Bosnian Muslims. By instigating, supporting, encouraging, facilitating and or participating in the dissemination of information and propaganda to Bosnian Croats that was intended to advance the joint criminal enterprise. It's alleged that you did it by planning, instigating, commanding, directing, participating in, facilitating or supporting the HVO takeover of various municipal governments and efforts to Croatize the Bosnian Muslim and other non-Croat population in areas which the Herceg-Bosna HVO leaders claimed were part of Herceg-Bosna. By encouraging, controlling, funding, facilitating, assisting and or participating in the production, acquisition or distribution of military equipment, arms, ammunition, funds, logistical support and other means which were used to advance the joint criminal enterprise. By requesting, obtaining, arranging, facilitating and or coordinating the participation and assistance of elements of the Republic of Croatia government, armed forces, police and intelligence services. By establishing, organizing, directing, funding, facilitating, supporting, participating in, maintaining and or operating a system of Herceg-Bosna HVO prisons, concentration camps and other detention facilities. By establishing, organizing, directing, funding, facilitating, supporting, participating in, maintaining and or operating a system for the deportation or forcible transfer of Bosnian Muslims to other countries or to parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina which were not claimed or controlled by Herceg-Bosna as part of and in furtherance of the joint criminal enterprise. By ordering, instigating, promoting, encouraging, facilitating and or implementing the systematic use by Herceg-Bosna HVO forces of Bosnian Muslims detainees for unlawful forced labor. By promoting, instigating, encouraging and condoning the commission of crimes against Bosnian Muslims, by failing to report and or investigate crimes, and by failing to punish or discipline subordinates and others responsible. Finally, by engaging in, encouraging, facilitating or supporting efforts to deny, conceal and or minimize crimes committed by the Herceg-Bosna HVO authorities and forces against Bosnian Muslims or other non-Croats. In paragraph 39 of the indictment, it is set out in what kind of criminal activities you were engaged in the view of the prosecutor as a part of and in the course of the actions described otherwise in the indictment, including ethnic cleansing. And the prosecutor confronts you with the following activities: with the instigation and fomentation of political, ethnic or religious strife, division and hatred, by speeches, propaganda and false information, the Herceg-Bosna HVO authorities created, instigated and supported a charged anti-Muslim atmosphere, promoted ethnic division and fostered religious mistrust. By the use of force, intimidation and terror, Herceg-Bosna HVO authorities and military and police units used force and the threat of force to dominate, suppress and persecute Bosnian Muslims. In the course of mass arrests and evictions, Bosnian Muslims were killed, severely injured, sexually assaulted, robbed of their property and otherwise abused. Under C, it says that you engaged in appropriation and destruction of property. That Bosnian Muslims were to abandon their homes and that money, cars and personal property were often taken or looted. Paragraph 39 further mentions detention and imprisonment. That a system of ill treatment was established, supported and operated, involving a network of prisons, concentration camps and other detention facilities. That not only men, but also women, children and elderly were arrested and detained and imprisoned. That they were kept, at least many of them, in horrible conditions and deprived of basic human necessities. And that they suffered inhumane treatment and physical and psychological abuse. Paragraph 39 further mentions the forcible transfer and deportation. That a system of ill treatment was established, supported and operated to deport Bosnian Muslims to other countries or transfer them to parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina not claimed or controlled by Herceg-Bosna. Finally, paragraph 39 mentions forced labor. That many Bosnian Muslims were held by the HVO and that they were forced to engage in physical labor, including digging trenches and retrieving bodies, often in combat and dangerous conditions, which resulted in many Bosnian Muslims detainees being killed or severely wounded. Some of them were used as human shields. These are central parts of these indictments. I will now briefly indicate to you what locations are specifically referred to in the indictments, giving further details of what happened in these locations. That is Prozor municipality, Gornji Fakuf municipality, Sovici and Doljani Jablanica Mun, Mostar municipality, the Heliodrome camp, the Vojno camp, the Ljubuški municipality and detention center, Stolac municipality, Čapljina municipality, Drejtal district military prison, Gabela district military prison, and Veres municipality.